All right, Liz. Liz, where are you from originally?
I'm from New Jersey, Glen Ridge. It's a small suburban town not far from New York City.
Tell me about your family.
Um, yeah, I had a good childhood. Um, my mom had kind of a high up job in the city, so she commuted every day and she worked long hours. So I didn't she wasn't around a lot, but my dad was the one who he worked from home, and he was the one really taking care of me and my brother as far as like getting us ready for school and meals and all that.
Sounds like a good childhood.
It was good. Yeah. Um, when I was around 5 or 6, my parents they wanted to have another child, and they tried everything under the sun and they couldn't conceive. So they decided to adopt, and they decided to adopt a baby from Mexico. So when I was 6, um, my parents and I went to Tijuana, Mexico, and my brother was a newborn um, when we adopted him, and so the first month we were there, we were all there together, living in Tijuana for a month, and then after a month, my mom had to get back to her job. I had to get back to school, so my mom and I left, and my dad stayed. And then for like a month or two after that, my mom and I kind of were a little back and forth between here and Tijuana. And so after like two, I want to say almost 2 months, everything kind of fell apart as far as the adoption. The lawyer that my parents were using was basically a crook, and he was providing fraudulent birth certificates. And he was doing it to a lot of people and stealing their money. Uh, so he was under investigation at the time, and my parents, so they had to get a new lawyer, and the adoption was basically null and void, and my parents could not take my brother back to the US legally. And my dad was also told that he could be arrested at any point and that my brother could be taken away from them at any point. So they got a new lawyer, and she told them uh, on the birth certificate, they were told that my brother's birth mother was a school teacher, and she had a fake name. It wasn't a real person. And so the first thing that they had to do was find my brother's actual birth mom, and they had to have her full cooperation in order to move ahead with the adoption and take my brother home. So it was, yeah. So um, my my parents found the his birth mom, and she was a sex worker. And my mom actually went. They found out where she lived, and my mom actually went to her apartment. And apparently, there were needles everywhere and drug paraphernalia. So we don't. We're not 100% certain that his birth mom was using drugs when she was pregnant with him, but all signs kind of point to that. Um, but they found her, and she cooperated, and 10 months later, my dad was in Tijuana for 10 months dealing with this. My mom and myself were back home waiting for him. And 10 months later, it finally went through and he was able to bring my brother home. So it was really devastating for my parents, both financially, emotionally. It was difficult for me being a little girl, and I was so used to having my dad around all the time, and then he was just gone all of a sudden for almost a year. And now, of course, looking back, I'm like, he didn't really have a choice, you know? He couldn't leave, but at the time, I didn't. Of course, I didn't understand it, but yeah.
So eventually you got a brother, a little
I was
brother.
very excited. Yeah.
And how was life with your new brother?
It was fun. I remember, yeah, I was so excited to have a sibling and have a little brother. Um, yeah, like we had fun together growing up. It wasn't until I should say well, yeah, he was 24 when he died, but it wasn't until high school that he started having trouble in school and started getting into alcohol and drugs.
Before we go
Yeah,
into that, let me just back up a bit.
yeah.
So, I mean, like growing up with your brother, it was pretty much, how would you compare it to having a biological brother?
Uh, felt the
The
same for
same.
me.
He was your brother.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, he became part of the family.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when did you first see signs of trouble?
Um, yeah, probably I would say when he started high school, um, he was always kind of going against like societal norms in the way that he acted, the way that he dressed, the music he listened to. Like he took everything to the extreme. And he just liked to look different and be different. And I think the town we grew up in was predominantly white, and him having darker skin and being from Mexico and adopted, I think had an effect on him as well. I don't think he ever uh, felt like he fit in.
And is there any drug use, any history of that in your family at all? You, your parents?
No. I mean, my my dad's side has some like alcoholism, but that's about it.
Hmm. So it's not something you guys are used to.
No, no. uh, yeah, it was difficult. I
What was your brother's name?
Max.
Max. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I felt like I think we had a really special relationship where he confided in me a lot and he really trusted me with certain things. And I know that he would tell me things that he wouldn't necessarily tell my parents or other people. So there were things that I saw as far as like him using drugs um, in the house, for example, but I never told anyone. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want to break that trust. I wanted him to still be able to come to me, and I wanted to be like a good sister. So yeah, it was difficult. Um,
Do you wish now that you had said something to your parents, perhaps?
yes, but also I'm not sure because I don't think it would have made any type of difference. Um, yeah, there's a lot of things that looking back, I wonder, should I have done this? Should I have said this? I could have done this. But at the end of the day, um, I know now, like, I'm at peace with the fact that there's absolutely nothing I could have done to change the outcome of what happened.
What drugs was he using in high school?
Oh, like anything that he could get his hands on.
Oh, really?
He was a big drinker. Um, yeah, really anything. Like when I say he was extreme in anything that he did, he would do any drug that was handed to him and do like all of it. Like he was just. Um, but it wasn't until I want to say after. Well, his drug use was bad towards the end of high school, and then he managed to graduate high school. And he, I don't know when he got into heroin. I don't know when he started using. I don't know if it was high school or after high school, but after high school, he got pretty bad into heroin, and um, he was in and out of rehabs, and my parents were doing everything that they could, and he would go to rehab and then, uh, relapse. So and my parents basically they kicked him out. They didn't. They you know.
I assume up until here, up until this point, he had the same childhood you did,
Yeah.
the same loving parents, and
Oh
same.
yeah.
So it looks like a genetic
Yeah. I think so.
thing rather
Yeah.
than.
Yeah. Very loving parents who did absolutely. I mean, they love both of us so much and did everything that they could. But it's like, again, it's so hard to know what to do when you have a loved one that's suffering from addiction. Um, but he I mean, he was deep in his addiction, and he moved out, and he was homeless for a while. He was living in New York, living on the streets. So it was really scary for my parents and for me. I mean, it was constant worry about him, where he was, what he was doing. Is he going to die today? Is he going to end up in jail? Like, really, anything could happen at any moment. And so I made the decision that at the time that I couldn't have him in my life if he was not going to get help, because it was just too difficult for me, and it was too difficult seeing my parents, and I was very angry at him. So me and him didn't talk for probably 3 to 4 years. And yeah, and it was still like, regardless, even not speaking to him, I was still constantly worried about him. But it was too difficult to communicate with him a lot of the time. Uh, so yeah, we hadn't spoken for a few years, and I I knew he was living in New York City, but then he went out to LA to go to rehab, and I still hadn't talked to him yet, but I got a call one day from a woman who worked at this rehab, and she said, "Hey, you're Max's sister. We have a family weekend coming up here in LA." And I was living in New Jersey at the time. And Max would love it if you came. He said he really wants you there. And so I went. I went to see him, and it was the first time that I saw him in a few years, and it was the first time I saw him sober in a few years, or in more than a few years, in a long time. Um, and that was hands down the best weekend of my life. Um, Spending that weekend with my brother, and he was so happy I was there, and he was so proud, and like telling everyone like, oh, it's my sister, like she came all the way from New Jersey, and he was so happy I was there, and I was so happy to see him sober. But it was always, he had been in that place before, like as far as being in rehab and being sober, so I was never too hopeful about it. I was like very cautiously hopeful every time he got sober. But that was, yeah, that was a really beautiful weekend that I spent with him. Um,
How old was he then?
so that was about a year before he died. So he was 23.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, and so I felt like seeing him that weekend, it felt really good because it felt like kind of we were like establishing this new relationship. Um, and I was really excited for it. Uh, I felt the most hopeful that weekend that I felt in a long time. Um, so after that, I didn't see him. I didn't see him at all. We talked. We texted a lot. We talked on the phone. Um, he sounded like he was doing really well. Um, made a lot of friends, and also I should say, when I was at this family weekend at his rehab, we had a therapy session. It was just the two of us and the therapist there, and uh, he apologized to me. He called me sis, and he said, "Sis, I'm so sorry for what I put you through growing up." And it was the first time he ever like acknowledged it, or like any of the hurt that he caused. And I knew it was really genuine, and I think I just felt really close to him in that moment. Um, but so he was living in LA, and he loved it there, and he really like made that his home. And um, I was still living in New Jersey, and then my mom, this was about a month before he died. My mom and I went out to visit him in LA, and he didn't say that he had been using, but because I just had been through it so often before with him, I just had a feeling like he was just acting, I don't know, different, and he wasn't acting like the way that he was when I saw him before that. So that was a really hard visit, and I just left with kind of like a bad feeling. I can't really explain it. And then um, a month later, I was at work, and it was March 21st of 2017, And I got a call from my mom, and she said, Max overdosed. Your dad's in LA right now with him at the hospital. Um, and yeah, and so I went home, and I just like, I don't know, it's all kind of a blur. Um, but I knew it wasn't good. And um, I don't even remember like how I slept that night, but I did. And then the following day, my mom and I took a plane out to LA. Um, and we went directly to the hospital. And there were some friends of his that were there, and we walked into his room. My dad was there, and my brother was on life support. And uh, and that was on Wednesday night. And then the next day, it's like all of his friends were there that he had met in LA, and that was really special. They were all friends that he had met who were in recovery. So they were all by his side. And I remember the doctor, they did some brain scans on him, and the doctor coming in and reading us, and we were all surrounding my brother, and he was in this bed, and he read us the results. And he said, I forget how long my brother was without oxygen to his brain, but because it had been so long that he was basically brain dead, and he would be in this vegetative state forever and would probably never be able to breathe on his own again. And like um, that, that's when it really hit me, because, and I remember the doctor saying that, and I just like my legs like gave out, like I just um because I knew that like he was gone. And yeah, I just remember crying and holding my mom. um and yeah, we just stayed by his side all day that day. And then my parents, I mean, we made the decision to take him off life support later that night. So I think it was a Thursday around like 8:30 at night. He was taken off life support, and he didn't actually die until Friday at 10:30 in the morning. So we were just up all night with him, and just like waiting for him to like pass. Um, I felt like I was in this like dream state, and I was so tired. We were all so tired from not sleeping or eating, and we just um it's like I could still hear like the sound of like the ventilator and the beeping. It just um and and then he died on Friday. And And I just remember just holding his hand. I don't know. There's like nothing that can prepare you. Like I thought I would I always I felt like before he died, I had to kind of prepare myself for that because I knew it was such a strong possibility. Um, but nothing could prepare you for it like actually happening and seeing someone you love in, like just in a hospital bed. And yeah, it was really traumatic for all of us. And
Do you feel there was anything you could have done?
no, I think that if he hadn't died that day, if he hadn't overdosed when he did, it would have happened at some point. Um, I know that. I don't know that he ever would have gotten sober and stayed sober, unfortunately. Um, I also think a part of him like really liked that lifestyle of living on the streets, and I don't know. I mean, I think he felt in a way like most at home there, like more at home than he did at his actual home with
I
us.
mean, on the streets.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've seen that a lot.
yeah. He had it was like his family, and yeah,
They just don't feel comfortable with a better situation, a better
right,
living situation.
exactly. And yeah, I think, I mean, I know he struggled with depression, and there was a mental illness
They're all
too.
together.
Yeah, he was. I know he was suffering a lot. I don't think he really cared whether he lived or died. Like, I don't think he would have ever like tried to kill himself, but I I just don't think he really cared towards the end either way.
Do you feel like this is just the way he was? He was just born this way genetically.
Mhm.
It was inside him from birth.
I do. And I think it was mostly genetic because, again, we were raised the same way with the same loving parents. But um, I think him being adopted played a huge part in it. He had that feeling of not being wanted or abandoned from very early on, and I don't think he ever really like came to terms with that, I guess. And I think he just never felt like he fit in, and he felt very lonely and sad a lot of the time.
Do you feel like there's anything you've learned from all of this?
I think I've learned a lot. Uh, I've learned. I think when I was going through this with him, I had a lot of anger. I still do. The therapy has helped a lot, but I was very angry at him, and and I don't think I really understood addiction the way I do now. And now I've I feel like I have so much more love and compassion for people who are suffering with addiction. And I've learned that people who use drugs, people who are addicted to drugs, or put a needle in their arm, whatever it is, uh, deserve just as much love and compassion as anyone else. Because I see my brother and all addicts now. Um,
You feel like it's a mental illness more than a predisposition to drug addiction?
uh,
To me, I see the mindset that they have
yeah,
opens the door for drug use,
yeah,
which always leads to an addiction.
right. Yeah, I think maybe it's a mix of both.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've also learned that I feel like I treat my relationships now very differently than I did in the past before losing my brother. I really treasure all of my relationships with, especially with my parents and my friends. And I mean, life is very precious and it could end at any time. So I feel like I have a lot more love now in me.
That's great. Well, Liz, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
I'm sorry about your brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.